It started with a group chat I nearly ignored. "Lake house this weekend?" Jacob had typed, followed by a string of fire emojis, a canoe gif, and a poorly cropped photo of his dad grilling on their back deck last summer. I almost scrolled past it. After all, I had nothing packed. My laundry situation was tragic, and I was already feeling emotionally off balance from a recent breakup that still lingered in my chest like stale perfume. But something in me said yes. Maybe it was the thought of cold water and hotter sun, the comfort of old friends, or maybe, if I'm being brutally honest, it was the chance to be around him again. Mr. Callahan, Jacob's dad. Technically, Mr. Callahan only out of habit. He told me to call him Rick years ago, but I couldn't. I still remembered being 16, stepping into that lake house for the first time, and seeing him in cut-off cargo shorts and a navy Henley, flipping burgers with one hand and nursing a beer in the other. There was something about him. Steadiness, roughness, something quiet but magnetic. I never let myself dwell on it for long. He was a father, a grown man, my best friend's dad. Off-limits didn't even begin to cover it. Still, 10 minutes after the invite, I typed back, "Count me in." We arrived Friday afternoon. The lake shimmered like glass in the distance, trees swaying with late summer breeze, and the familiar cedar scent of the Callahan deck made something in my chest loosen. Jacob was all energy, laughing, cursing at the trunk for eating his duffel bag, already halfway into the lake with a floaty around his waist before I'd even picked a room. The others, our friends from college, filtered in slowly, greeting each other with half-drunk enthusiasm. Felt easy, relaxed, everything I didn't know I needed. Then I saw him. Rick Callahan stepped out of the guest house in a faded black t-shirt, khaki work pants, and those worn leather boots he probably never gave up. His beard had more salt than I remembered, but his eyes, those steel blue eyes, were the same. Sharp, thoughtful, a little tired. He paused when he saw me, just for a second. "Hey, kid," he said, nodding like we'd just seen each other yesterday. "Hey, Mr. Callahan." He smirked. "Still with the mister? Thought we'd graduated past that by now." I laughed softly. Some habits die hard. We shook hands, his grip firm, his palm warm, and I tried not to overthink how my chest reacted to that tiny, completely ordinary human contact. "You staying the whole weekend?" he asked. "Yeah. Figured I needed the air." "Good," he said. "You look like you do." And then he was gone, carrying a bundle of firewood like it weighed nothing, disappearing back around the side of the house while my pulse did cartwheels. That night, we grilled burgers and roasted corn over the fire pit. Music played low, classic rock mostly, and conversation swirled in lazy circles. I sipped a hard seltzer and watched the light shift across Rick's face as he laughed with someone about fishing trips and old car engines. I should have been paying attention to the group, but I wasn't. I watched how he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest like he was always bracing for something. I watched how he smiled without ever fully letting go, how he looked at Jacob with pride he didn't always say aloud. I watched his hands. God, I had to stop watching his hands. Later, when the others drifted inside, I stayed out by the lake alone. The moon danced on the surface of the water. Crickets hummed a soft rhythm, and fireflies blinked at the tree line. I thought I was alone, but then I heard the soft creak of deck wood. "Couldn't sleep?" Rick asked, voice low behind me. I didn't turn around right away. Just needed air. He stepped beside me, arms folded, looking out at the same silver lake. "Something about water at night, huh?" I nodded. "Feels honest." We stood in silence for a few moments, and then he said something that sank straight into my chest. "You ever get the feeling you're supposed to be somewhere else, but you don't know where that is?" I looked at him, startled by the question. "Yeah, all the time." He gave a small nod, like he wasn't surprised. Then he clapped my shoulder once, brief but grounding, and said, "Get some rest. Tomorrow's supposed to be hot." And just like that, he walked back into the dark. But I stayed at the edge of the dock for a long time, wondering why my heart was louder than the crickets, and what exactly I was trying not to feel. The next morning arrived in a slow blur of golden light and scattered laughter. Birds chirped somewhere overhead, and the scent of eggs and bacon wafted through the kitchen window like a promise. I wandered into the main room, hair a mess, wearing an old hoodie and wrinkled shorts that definitely didn't match. Jacob was already halfway through a sausage biscuit, sitting cross-legged on the deck and arguing with two of our friends about who could paddleboard farther without falling off. "You in?" he asked, mouth half full, nodding toward the lake. I shrugged. "Maybe later. I was thinking about kayaking first." Jacob tossed me a granola bar. "The red kayak's free. Just don't get eaten by lake monsters." By 10, most of the group was either paddleboarding, tanning on the dock, or trying to balance a volleyball game on wet grass. I slipped into the kayak quietly, needing space and silence and water beneath me. The lake looked even better in the daylight, glassy, wide, endlessly blue. I paddled out past the line of docks, past the tree shadows, where it felt like I could exhale without hearing anyone else breathe. I didn't have a plan. I just drifted, dipped the paddle in lazy circles, and let the morning sun warm my skin. A heron swooped overhead. Somewhere on shore, a Bluetooth speaker blared a pop remix that sounded out of place among the trees. That's when it happened. One careless shift in weight, one glance too long over my shoulder, and the kayak tilted. I tried to balance, but it was too late. The world tipped sideways, and with a huge splash, I plunged into the cold, green water. The shock of it was instant. Ice sliding down my back, water flooding into my shoes, the sting of lake water up my nose. I surfaced sputtering, hair in my face, arms flailing to keep hold of the drifting kayak. I swam it to the shallows and dragged myself out, soaking wet, shirt clinging to my chest like a second skin. My sneakers squelched with every step as I sloshed barefoot up the gravel path toward the house. And that's when I saw him. Rick Callahan was leaning against the railing of the side porch, coffee mug in hand, a book half open on the table next to him. His head lifted when he heard the squish of my footsteps. His eyes flicked over me head to toe. He didn't laugh, didn't smirk, just set down his mug, calmly walked to the steps and said, "Come dry off." I blinked at him. Tipped. I wasn't. "Yeah, I figured." He grabbed a towel from the bench beside him and handed it to me. "You okay?" I nodded, already rubbing the towel against my hair like I could erase the whole thing. "Come on," he said. "No one else is back yet. You'll freeze if you stay out here." He turned and walked toward the guest house, the small detached cabin where he usually stayed alone on weekends like this. And for some reason, I followed. Inside, it was cooler than I expected. Dim, clean, smelled faintly of cedar and shaving cream. Rick motioned toward a chair near the fireplace. "Sit," he said. "You're dripping all over the floor." "Sorry," I mumbled. He waved it off, disappearing into the back room. I sat on the edge of the chair, still soaked, still trying to catch my breath. My shirt stuck to my chest like glue, and my shorts felt like they weighed 20 pounds. I rubbed the towel over my arms, trying to ignore the tiny trembles that came from either cold or adrenaline, or both. Rick returned a minute later with a bundle in his hands. "Here," he said, holding it out. "Didn't want you to catch something." It was one of his old flannels, deep navy with thin gray stripes, and a pair of cotton sweatpants. "You didn't have to." He cut me off with a look. "I know. Just go change." I hesitated, then took the bundle and stepped into the bathroom, where I peeled off my soaked clothes and wrapped myself in his warmth. The flannel was too big, hung off my shoulders like a blanket, but it was soft and dry and smelled like him. Soap and wood and something that felt safe. I stared at myself in the mirror for a second. Hair a mess, water still glistening on my skin, my heart beating like it knew something I didn't. When I stepped back out, Rick was sitting at the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, watching the fireplace even though it wasn't lit. He turned and his gaze paused. "Fits you," he said quietly. I sat across from him. "Thanks. For everything." He nodded. The silence between us stretched. Not awkward, not empty, just quiet, charged. "Jacob'll probably be back soon," I said, mostly just to say something. "Yeah. You, Always this prepared for soaking wet guests? That finally drew a small smile. Not always, but you've got a way of showing up when it counts. His voice was low, measured, like each word was weighed before it left his mouth. I swallowed. Sorry again about the floor. Stop apologizing, he said. You fell in a lake, not committed a felony. I laughed, soft and short. He did too. Then he leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, and looked at me. Really looked. You okay? He asked again, but softer this time. Not about the lake. Not about the fall. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say no. That I wasn't okay. That I'd been floating lately, adrift. That the past few months had felt like unraveling string. And for some reason, sitting in this room with him in a borrowed flannel felt like the first real thing in a while. But all I said was, yeah, I think I am now. Rick didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered, gentle, searching. It felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. Or maybe a door I was scared to open. Outside, the voices of our friends echoed from the dock. But inside the guest house, it was still just us. Two men in a quiet room, pretending the silence didn't feel like something waiting to happen. I barely tasted the grilled chicken on my plate that night. Jacob had made a big show of seasoning it with a family secret dry rub. And while everyone else around the table raved and passed extra napkins, I pushed mine around with my fork, nodding absently and offering the occasional laugh. Because my thoughts weren't on dinner. They were still in the guest house. Still wrapped in the borrowed flannel. Still buzzing with the echo of Rick's voice and the quiet weight of his gaze. That moment. His gesture, the closeness, the concern in his voice, had cracked something open in me. I didn't know what it was yet, but it hadn't closed since. And now he was sitting just a few feet away. Across the long, weathered picnic table, Rick nursed a glass of wine. One hand wrapped around the stem while his other rested near his plate. Unmoving, calm. He wasn't talking much, just nodding occasionally while Jacob rambled about some hike he wanted to do tomorrow. A lantern on the table threw a warm, golden light across Rick's face, and I caught myself watching the way it glinted in his eyes. He glanced up and met my gaze. Brief, controlled, but it was there. My stomach tightened. I quickly looked away, pretending to listen to the conversation about paddleboards and trail mix. But I could still feel his attention, like a hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Jacob stood to grab another beer. Rick followed him, but only after giving me the faintest brush of his fingers as he passed. So quick, so subtle, it could have been an accident. It wasn't. That tiny touch was intentional, deliberate, and it lit me up from the inside. When they returned, I watched more carefully. I started noticing things I hadn't before. How Rick angled his body toward me whenever Jacob's head was turned. How his eyes lingered just a beat longer when I laughed. How, when Jacob went inside to grab dessert, Rick leaned in closer and murmured, "Still cold from earlier?" I shook my head. "Your flannel helped." He smirked. "It always does." Jacob plopped back down into his seat and dropped a plate of brownies on the table. "My dad only wears those flannels like armor," he said, laughing. "Total lone wolf. You've probably noticed." Rick raised his brow. "That so? Yeah, come on. You're the guy who grills alone, hikes alone, fixes broken things in silence like some middle-aged mountain monk." The table laughed. I did too, though something twisted quietly in my chest. Rick only smiled faintly, sipping his wine. His eyes flicked toward me just once. Lone wolf. Maybe. Or maybe just someone who hadn't been seen in a while. When dinner wrapped up and everyone headed toward the fire pit for s'mores and ghost stories, I slipped away with the excuse of needing a hoodie. Truth was, I couldn't sit next to Rick in that firelight, pretending everything felt normal. I circled the house slowly, barefoot in the grass, and came up behind the deck that overlooked the lake. The moon was brighter now, rising high, casting shadows across the water like paint strokes. Crickets played their eternal melody in the trees. And Rick was there, alone again, sitting in the same wooden chair he'd occupied the night before, a single lantern flickering beside him. His silhouette looked carved out of stillness, elbows on knees, gaze fixed forward. I stood quietly for a moment, not wanting to disturb him, but he spoke before I could move. You always walk that quiet? I smiled, stepping into the lantern's glow. You always sit that still? He glanced over. It's easier than pretending to laugh at marshmallow jokes. I eased down into the chair beside him. Yeah, I didn't really feel like pretending either. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. The silence between us felt different tonight. Not charged like earlier, but gentle. Mutual. We both seemed to be searching for the right thread to pull. Rick finally broke it. You ever feel stuck? He asked softly. Like you're in the middle of something but can't figure out how you got there? I stared out at the lake. Yeah. Lately, more than ever. He exhaled, long and low. After the divorce, I thought I'd feel free. But instead, it was like I was just floating, not anchored to anything. No one really sees you when you're just drifting. I glanced at him. His profile in the lantern light was all soft edges and silent ache. I see you, I said before I could stop myself. He turned to look at me. Our eyes met. He didn't say anything for a long time, just looked at me like he was trying to memorize the moment. Then he said, I see you too. Something warm unraveled in my chest, like someone had gently pulled the knot loose and let the tension dissolve. I've always wondered. I began, then stopped.
No.
Never mind. Say it. I hesitated. Then, if you knew, back then, he smiled, soft and sad, that you used to avoid eye contact with me like it burned? I flushed. Yeah, that. I noticed, he said quietly. But I figured, if it was real, you'd tell me someday. And if it wasn't, then I'd rather let it stay a maybe than scare it away. The air grew still again. Not awkward, just full of all the things neither of us had ever said aloud. You scare me, I admitted. Rick's voice was steady. You don't scare me. I swallowed. What are we doing? He leaned back, gazing out over the water. Something we probably shouldn't. But I'm too tired to keep pretending I don't feel it. I looked down at my hands, unsure of what to do with them. I don't know where this goes, I whispered. He turned back toward me, his voice low and sure. We don't have to know. We just have to be honest. I nodded. A breeze moved through the trees, cool and comforting. I stayed out there with him for a long time. We didn't kiss, didn't touch. We didn't have to, because sometimes connection isn't in the heat of the moment. It's in the stillness after. In the quiet where two people say everything without saying a word. And in that quiet, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel stuck. I felt seen. Saturday started slower than the others. The sky had turned a dull pewter by breakfast, and the air carried that thick, static hush that always came before a summer storm. Jacob announced he was heading into town with a few friends. Something about supplies, snacks, and a quick stop at a roadside antique shop that sold the world's creepiest dolls. I declined the invitation, half because I needed a break and half because I knew who else was staying behind. Rick. He didn't say much when they left, just nodded toward me from the porch as the others piled into the car, then disappeared inside the main house. I lingered on the back deck, watching the clouds churn above the lake, heavy and gray, waiting. It wasn't long before the rain came. First a soft drizzle, then steady drops tapping the glass like fingers drumming for attention. By late morning, I wandered back toward the house. The kitchen windows glowed with warm light, fogging slightly from the contrast of humidity outside and the coffee pot steaming on the stove. Rick stood at the counter, barefoot, in jeans and a soft charcoal t-shirt that looked recently laundered. He poured 2 mugs of coffee and glanced up as I entered. Figured you might want one, he said, sliding a mug toward me. Mind reader, I replied, wrapping both hands around the warmth. We stood in silence for a moment, sipping quietly as the rain came down heavier. The sound filled the space, steady, rhythmic, grounding. I always liked the rain up here, Rick said after a while. Makes everything feel simpler. I leaned against the counter. Makes me feel smaller, in a good way. He looked at me, brow raised. That's not something people usually say. I mean it, I said, shrugging. It's like the world slows down, forces you to feel instead of move. Rick nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. He took another sip, then set his cup down. You remind me of someone I used to know. I tilted my head. Yeah. She was quiet, thoughtful, used to ask questions nobody else did. Back when I was in my 20s, before everything. Before Jacob? He nodded. Before marriage. Before I forgot how to talk about things that mattered. I watched him closely as he leaned back against the sink, arms folded, his gaze distant. My ex-wife used to tell me I was impossible to know, he continued. Said I lived in my own world, and even when she knocked, I never opened the door. That true? He thought for a long second. Sometimes, I think I just didn't know how to let someone in without feeling like I'd lose myself. That's heavy. Rick smiled faintly. Yeah, love can be heavy, especially when you're not ready for the weight. I looked down at the rim of my coffee mug, tracing it slowly with my fingertip. Something in his voice was pulling at me, some quiet thread unraveling between us. You don't seem impossible to know, I said softly. His eyes met mine, steady, unflinching. Maybe that's because you're not knocking. You're already inside. I didn't know what to say to that. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my fingertips. The air in the kitchen had changed, warmer, closer. Outside, thunder rolled distantly, like the world giving us permission to pause. He stepped forward, slowly, as if giving me time to move. But I couldn't. When he reached me, he lifted a hand. Not fast, not assuming. Just a quiet motion, and gently brushed the damp hair away from my forehead. His fingers lingered, barely touching skin. The silence between us swelled. My breath hitched. His hand dropped slowly to his side, as if even that light touch had taken something from him. Then, his voice, low and steady. You make me feel something I haven't in a long time. It wasn't a line. It wasn't slick or strategic. It was honest, raw, like a truth that had waited too long to be spoken. I felt it in every part of me, in the warmth crawling up my neck, in the way I couldn't break eye contact, in the way the line between right and wrong blurred into something softer, something real. I don't know what to do with that, I whispered. You don't have to, he replied. Not today. Not yet. I set my coffee down. My hands were trembling, just slightly. Jacob. Rick nodded. I know. We both stood there for a moment, two people on the edge of something, not sure whether to leap or step back. Then he stepped away, gave me space, respect, air to breathe again. I'm gonna check the windows upstairs, he said gently. Rain sometimes leaks in through the guest room. I nodded, unsure if my voice would work. He walked out of the kitchen, and I stood alone in the warmth he left behind. I didn't follow. I just listened, to the storm outside, and to the one that had begun quietly inside me. The rain had passed by morning, leaving behind a silver sheen on the dock and a fog that clung low over the lake. Everything felt heavy with dew and unsaid things. The kind of silence that followed a storm, calm, but not peaceful. More like the hush after something important is said and no one knows what to do with it. I woke up early and lingered under the covers longer than I needed to. I could hear the creak of floorboards in the kitchen, the low rumble of a male voice. His voice, and suddenly the air in the guest room felt too thick to breathe. I didn't want to see him. Not yet. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know how to look him in the eye without my heart stammering like it had something to confess. So I slipped out while everyone was still waking up, grabbed a hoodie, and walked barefoot down to the dock. Mist swirled off the surface of the lake in soft ribbons. My reflection stared back at me, blurred and uncertain. I sat at the edge, arms around my knees, and tried to make sense of the hurricane inside me. I'd spent so long learning to control this part of myself, to be careful, to stay quiet. Coming out wasn't easy for me. It wasn't fireworks and pride flags. It was whispered admissions, lost friendships, sideways glances at family dinners. And even once the words were out, I'm gay, there were still layers of shame and fear and self-editing that didn't just disappear. I always thought I wanted someone who could handle that. Someone patient. Someone who wouldn't rush me or expect me to be louder than I was ready to be. Someone mature. Grounded. Safe. And somehow, that someone had become the man I was trying so hard not to want. Rick Callahan. My best friend's father. The thought sent a pang through my chest. Part guilt, part wonder, part something I couldn't name. I didn't just like the way he looked at me. I liked who I was when he did. I didn't hear him approach. Just the soft crunch of gravel behind me and then the creak of the dock under added weight. Didn't mean to startle you, Rick said, his voice careful. I didn't turn around. You didn't. He sat beside me, keeping a respectful distance. Hands clasped, elbows on knees, gaze fixed straight ahead. I figured I might find you out here, he said after a moment. I didn't mean to run off. I know. He paused. I wanted to make sure you were okay. I exhaled slowly, the breath catching a little on the way out. I don't know what I am. He nodded like he understood more than I was saying. Last night, I crossed a line. No, I said quickly. You didn't. You were kind. Honest. He glanced at me. Still, you're Jacob's friend. You're young. And I'm not that much older, I interrupted. And not wrong. He looked at me for a long moment. I'm sorry if I made anything harder for you. You didn't. The silence stretched again. The lake lapped gently against the shore. I've been trying not to want this, I admitted. Trying to remind myself of all the reasons it doesn't make sense. Jacob, the age gap, the fact that this only lasts a weekend. But, he asked gently. I swallowed. But I do want it. I just don't know how to want it out loud yet. Rick's shoulders eased a little. I get that. I've spent so long trying to feel normal around guys I'm supposed to like. My own age. Party types. Guys who post shirtless gym selfies and make you feel like a phase if you don't fit the mold. Rick smiled faintly. Yeah, I'm definitely not that guy. No, I said. You're the one who makes coffee in silence and listens more than he talks. Who offers towels without asking questions and remembers how I like my eggs from 4 summers ago. He was quiet again, but there was a softness in his expression, like something in him had unclenched. I'm not perfect, he said. I've made my share of mistakes, and I've been alone for a long time. So long that I stopped imagining what it might feel like to really connect with someone again. I looked at him, really looked. You haven't made a mistake, I said. He reached out then, not to touch me, but to rest his hand on the dock between us, palm up, open. An invitation. If you want me to back off, he said. I will. No questions. No hard feelings. I stared at his hand for a moment. Then slowly, I placed mine over it. I don't want you to, I said. I just need time to figure out how to make this make sense. Rick nodded. Then we take it slow. No pressure.
No expectations.
Just honesty, I whispered. Exactly. We sat there like that, hands resting together, quiet and steady. As the mist began to lift off the lake and the sun started pushing through the clouds. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to run. I didn't feel wrong or broken or confused. I just felt held. Jacob left early that afternoon with 2 of our friends, heading off for a short hike and a supply run. I could tell he was excited by how he barely paused to double, not his boots or mention when they'd be back. Couple of hours tops, he'd said, slapping my shoulder on the way out. You gonna be okay hanging back with the old man? I had chuckled. Played it cool. Yeah, I'll survive. He had no idea how loaded that question was. Once the truck rumbled out of the driveway, silence settled over the property. It wasn't the same silence from before. It was denser, expectant, the kind that hums in your chest when something's about to change. I busied myself by fixing a broken cabinet hinge in the guesthouse kitchen. Something about focusing on my hands helped distract my mind. Or tried to. The cabinet wouldn't stop creaking. Here, Rick said suddenly from behind me. Let me hold it steady. I startled slightly, hadn't even heard him come in. He crouched beside me, his hand brushing mine as he took the door from me. The contact was electric, even though it lasted just a second. His hand was warm, steady, familiar now. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded. "Yeah, just overthinking." He smiled faintly. "Me too." We finished fixing the cabinet. It was a simple task: tighten a screw, adjust the angle, but it felt like something else entirely, like we were slowly building towards something unspoken. When we stood, we realized we were closer than we'd been all day, barely a foot apart. His eyes searched mine, not desperate, not urgent, but curious, patient. "You're thinking loud again," he said, smiling softly. I nodded. "So are you." He hesitated. "Can I ask what's going through your head?" I let out a breath. "That this doesn't feel reckless. Feels quiet, real. But I keep waiting for the guilt to crash down." He watched me for a long moment. "Has it?" "Not yet," I said honestly. "And that scares me more than if it had." Rick stepped closer just slightly, enough that I could feel the warmth of his body, the tension in his breath. "I don't want to push you," he said. "You're not." His hand lifted, then stopped, suspended in the air between us. He waited. This time I was the one who moved first. I closed the space, slowly, gently, until our foreheads nearly touched. He tilted his head just a little, and then our lips met, soft, brief, careful. It wasn't heated or rushed. It was a quiet kiss. The kind of kiss that asks a question but doesn't expect an answer right away. When we pulled back, neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Rick's voice finally broke the silence. "Was that okay?" I nodded. "More than okay." He exhaled with what sounded like months, maybe years of stored-up tension. Then he leaned against the counter, folding his arms, smiling to himself like someone who'd finally let go of something heavy. I sat on one of the stools, heart still pounding, but in a different way now. Like it wasn't afraid anymore. Like it was starting to trust. We spent the rest of the afternoon in small moments. He made coffee. I toasted 2 slices of bread and forgot them in the oven. We sat on the porch for a while and talked about everything but the kiss. About books, about music, about the one time he tried paddleboarding and ended up with a bruised hip and a broken ego. He made me laugh until my stomach hurt. I never thought I'd feel that kind of joy here. Not at Jacob's lake house. Not with someone like Rick. And yet, it didn't feel wrong. Felt right in a way I hadn't expected. When we heard the truck pulling back into the gravel drive, we didn't scramble apart. We weren't even doing anything wrong. But we shared a glance. Something warm, something knowing, and took a breath together before walking back toward the main house. Jacob greeted us like nothing had changed. Like the storm inside me had never happened. He was chatting about a moose figurine he almost bought, passing out energy drinks, and asking what we'd done all day. "Fixed your cabinet," I said. Rick added, "Taught him how to use a screwdriver properly." Jacob rolled his eyes. "Dad's flirting with DIY again? Someone stop him." I laughed, but only Rick and I knew what that laughter really meant. What it had cost to get here. What it meant to keep going. The ride home with Jacob was quiet in that lazy, post-weekend kind of way. The windows were cracked just enough to let the breeze in, and his playlist, mostly old rock with a few surprising acoustic tracks, played low between us. "Good weekend," he said, yawning into his palm. "I needed that." I nodded. "Yeah, me too." But my heart was somewhere else. Or more accurately, still back at the lake, standing on that dock, holding someone's hand like it meant something. Like it was something. Rick hadn't said much when we left that morning. Just a soft goodbye on the porch. A brief hug, tight, strong, and laced with something I couldn't name yet. When I'd pulled away, he looked at me for a second too long, then turned back toward the house. It took everything in me not to look back when we drove off. That night, when I was finally home and alone, I sent the text. "Miss you already." I stared at the screen for a long time after pressing send, feeling foolish and open and 17 kinds of vulnerable. But his reply came quickly. "Me too." Just 2 words. But they were enough. The following weeks blurred with routine, work, errands, catching up with friends who didn't know anything had changed. On the surface, everything was the same. But beneath it, Everything was different. Rick and I started talking more. Quietly, carefully. We texted at first, then called. He'd send me photos from the lake, sunsets, the trail he liked to walk after dinner, the mug I left behind on the counter. Sometimes we'd talk about the news. Other times, nothing at all. And then one night I drove back up. Not for a group trip. Not with Jacob. Just for him. We spent that weekend cooking, laughing, sitting side by side on the porch in silence. It wasn't flashy or intense. It was easy, whole, a kind of peace I didn't know I'd been missing. Of course, secrets don't stay secret forever. Jacob found out 2 months later. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding his phone and looking somewhere between confused and wounded. "This real?" he asked, showing me a photo I hadn't realized Rick had posted. A simple shot of the two of us fixing a tire on the trail. Nothing obvious, but clear enough. I didn't lie. I just nodded. There was a long pause. "I don't know how to feel," Jacob said finally, sitting down hard on the edge of my couch. "It's weird, like really weird. You're my best friend. He's my dad." "I know," I said softly. "I didn't plan for it. I didn't even understand it at first. But you're happy?" I looked at him, then away. "Yeah, I am." He let out a long breath and rubbed his hands over his face. "Well," he muttered, "that's new." "What is?" "You both seem happier than I've ever seen either of you." I didn't respond. Didn't need to. He stayed for an hour. We talked. It wasn't simple, but it wasn't a disaster either. By the time he left, he gave me a look that almost bordered on amusement. "Just don't make me call you stepdad someday, okay?" We both burst out laughing, and just like that, something in the air eased. Seasons shifted. Leaves changed. Time passed. And eventually, I found myself driving back to the lake house again. It was early fall. The trees were fire orange and rust, the lake reflecting their color like a canvas. When I pulled up the gravel drive, the porch light was already on. Rick opened the door before I could even knock. Same flannel. Same warmth in his eyes. "You made good time," he said, stepping aside. "I left as soon as the meeting ended." He gave me that small smile, the one I'd memorized by now. The one that said I belonged here, even if the rest of the world didn't understand it yet. He pulled me into a quiet hug, his chin resting against the side of my head. I closed my eyes, breathing him in. Safe, solid, steady. Later, as we sat by the fireplace, mugs of cider in hand, I looked out at the lake and thought about the day this all started. The kayak, the cold water, the unexpected hand reaching toward me. I smiled, because sometimes everything changes the moment you stop pretending you're fine and let yourself be seen. And as I leaned into Rick's shoulder, feeling the weight of the quiet and the warmth of something real, I thought, I got soaked at the lake, but somehow that was the day I finally felt seen. Did this story make you believe in unexpected love? If you've ever fallen for someone you weren't supposed to, tell us your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how your heart surprised you. Like if you believe love has no rules. Subscribe for more emotional and real gay love stories every day.